It's 3 in the morning, you're dead asleep in your bed, and suddenly you hear the unmistakable sound of your car engine trying to turn over in your driveway. Your heart stops. Someone is literally stealing your car right now, just feet away from where you sleep. But here's the thing. These thieves had absolutely no idea what they were about to walk into. Because what happened next was so brilliant, so perfectly executed, that even the criminals themselves had to throw in the towel and admit defeat. This is the story of how one man's quick thinking and a $50 kill switch turned a car theft into the most satisfying revenge story you'll hear this year. If you've ever fantasized about outsmarting criminals who think they can just take whatever they want from hardworking people, you're going to absolutely love this story. Hit that like button right now, subscribe for more incredible revenge stories, and buckle up because this tale has more plot twists than a Christopher Nolan movie. Let me paint a picture for you of what life was like for our protagonist. We'll call him Marcus. Marcus lived in one of those cities where crime statistics weren't just numbers on a police report, they were daily reality checks. You know the type of place I'm talking about, where you develop an almost supernatural hearing for the sound of car alarms, where you instinctively park under streetlights, and where your neighbors share stories about break-ins like other people. Discuss the weather. Marcus drove a 1995 Honda Civic. Now, if you don't know much about cars, let me give you some context that will make your blood boil on Marcus's behalf. A 1995 Honda Civic to a car thief is like finding a $20 bill on the sidewalk. These older Hondas are criminally easy to steal, pun intended. The ignition systems are simple, the security features are practically non-existent by today's standards, and the parts are incredibly valuable on the black market. In Marcus's city, these cars were being stolen so frequently that some insurance companies had started refusing to cover them altogether. But Marcus wasn't just another naive victim waiting to happen. He'd watched too many of his neighbors become statistics. He'd seen the devastation in their eyes when they walked outside to find empty driveways where their vehicles used to be. These weren't just cars being stolen, these were people's livelihoods, their ability to get to work, to take their kids to school, to maintain any semblance of normal life in an increasingly chaotic city. So Marcus made an investment that would prove to be worth its weight in gold. He had a kill switch professionally installed in his car. For those who don't know, a kill switch is essentially a hidden button that completely cuts power to the ignition system. Without finding and activating that switch, his car was going absolutely nowhere. It was like having a secret password that only he knew, except the consequences of not knowing it meant sitting in a stolen car like an idiot while the owner called the police. Marcus lived with 3 roommates in a house that had become their fortress against the urban chaos surrounding them. These weren't just random strangers splitting rent, they'd become a genuine brotherhood, forged by necessity and mutual protection. There was David, a college student studying engineering who always seemed to have a solution for everything. Then there was Miguel, who worked nights at a local warehouse and had developed an almost supernatural ability to function on 3 hours of sleep. And finally, there was Kyle, an artist who skateboarded everywhere and had the kind of confidence that could either get you out of trouble or get you into even deeper trouble, depending on the situation. Their house had become a symbol of resistance in a neighborhood where giving up seemed like the only logical option. They looked out for each other's cars, they kept spare keys for emergencies, and they developed an unspoken pact that an attack on one of them was an attack on all of them. It was this brotherhood that would prove absolutely crucial in the events that were about to unfold. Life had been relatively peaceful for Marcus and his roommates in the weeks leading up to that fateful night. Sure, they'd hear the occasional car alarm screaming in the distance, and yes, they'd seen the news reports about the rising crime rates in their area, but their little corner of the neighborhood had remained relatively untouched. It was the kind of false security that makes what comes next feel like such a personal violation. Marcus had developed a routine that most people living in high-crime areas would recognize. Every night before bed, he'd peek out his bedroom window to make sure his car was still there. He'd check that all the doors were locked. He'd position his keys on his nightstand in exactly the same spot, just in case he needed to grab them quickly in an emergency. These weren't the actions of a paranoid person, these were the survival mechanisms of someone who'd learned to exist in an environment where letting your guard down for even one night could cost you everything. On this particular Tuesday evening, Marcus had gone to bed feeling relatively optimistic. He'd just gotten paid, His car was running smoothly, and he had plans for the weekend that actually involved leaving the neighborhood for something fun instead of something necessary. He'd fallen asleep listening to the familiar sounds of his city, distant traffic, the occasional siren, the white noise of urban life that had become as comforting as it was concerning. But around 3 in the morning, a sound cut through Marcus's dreams like a knife through silk. It was a sound that every car owner dreads but that residents of high-crime neighborhoods know intimately, the distinctive clicking noise of an engine trying to turn over but failing to start. Except this wasn't coming from some distant street or neighbor's driveway. This was coming from directly outside his bedroom window. Marcus's eyes snapped open, and for a moment, his brain tried to rationalize what he was hearing. Maybe he was still dreaming. Maybe it was a neighbor's car. Maybe his roommates were having car trouble. But as the clicking sound continued, that frustrated, repetitive noise of a starter motor being unable to complete its job, reality crashed over him like a bucket of ice water. Someone was stealing his car. Right now. At this very moment, there were criminals in his driveway, violating his space, taking what he'd worked so hard to earn and protect. The initial shock lasted maybe 3 seconds. Then it was replaced by something much more powerful, pure, undiluted rage. This wasn't just anger about potential property loss, this was the fury of violation, of disrespect, of being targeted by people who thought they could just take whatever they wanted from whoever they wanted. Marcus's heart wasn't just beating fast, it was pounding like a war drum, sending adrenaline coursing through his veins with such intensity that he could feel it in his fingertips. His mind raced through a dozen different scenarios in the span of seconds. Should he call the police first? Should he wake up his roommates? Should he grab a weapon? But then he heard the clicking sound again, and something primitive and protective took over his decision-making process. These thieves thought they were operating under cover of darkness, invisible and untouchable. They probably assumed that the homeowner was sound asleep, blissfully unaware that their most valuable possession was being stolen right outside their bedroom window. They'd calculated the risk and decided that a sleeping household posed no threat to their criminal enterprise. They were about to learn how catastrophically wrong they were. Marcus didn't even consider getting dressed. Time was of the essence, and every second he wasted was another second these criminals had to figure out his kill switch or to simply give up and move on to victimize someone else. He leaped out of bed wearing nothing but his boxer shorts, his feet hitting the cold floor with a determination that surprised even him. As he rushed toward his front door, Marcus could still hear the clicking. They were persistent, he'd give them that. But persistence in the service of theft was just stubbornness wearing a criminal mask, and Marcus was about to show them exactly what stubbornness looked like when it was fighting for justice instead of personal gain. Marcus burst through his front door like some kind of underwear-clad superhero responding to a distress call. The cool night air hit his skin, but the adrenaline flowing through his system made him completely immune to the cold. Standing on his porch, feeling the rough wooden boards under his bare feet, Marcus took the deepest breath his lungs could hold. And then he unleashed hell. The sound that came out of Marcus's throat wasn't just loud, it was primal. It was the voice of every property owner who'd ever been victimized, every hardworking person who'd ever had their stuff stolen by lazy criminals, every citizen who was tired of feeling powerless in their own neighborhood. It was the sound of righteous fury given voice, and it echoed through the night like a battle cry. The effect was instantaneous and beautiful. 2 figures practically exploded out of his car like they'd been launched from a cannon. These weren't smooth, professional criminals, these were opportunistic thieves who'd just realized they'd picked the wrong house and the wrong victim. They sprinted down the street with a desperation that would have been hilarious if the situation weren't so infuriating. Marcus watched them disappear into the darkness, his chest heaving with exertion and anger. The immediate threat was neutralized, but the violation remained. These people had come onto his property, attempted to steal his vehicle, and probably thought they could just run away and try again somewhere else. The injustice of it burned in his chest like acid. The commotion had woken up his roommates. One by one, they stumbled downstairs, David with his hair sticking up at impossible angles, Miguel squinting and trying to process what was happening, Kyle looking confused but already alert in that way that people who live in dangerous neighborhoods learn to master. Marcus quickly explained what had happened. Car thieves scared them off, crisis averted. They all went back inside, thinking the night's excitement was over. Marcus tried to convince himself that justice had been served, that he'd protected his property, demonstrated that his house wasn't an easy target, and sent a clear message that thieves weren't welcome in his driveway. He should have felt satisfied. But as he was walking back toward his bedroom, still riding the adrenaline high of confronting criminals and winning, still feeling like some kind of neighborhood superhero, the universe decided to remind him that some people just don't know when to quit. Click, 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 click. Marcus froze in place. The sound was unmistakable. Someone was trying to start a car engine. Again. In his driveway. These thieves hadn't just failed to learn their lesson. They'd interpreted his mercy as weakness and decided to come back for round two. The audacity was breathtaking. The sheer, unbelievable nerve of these criminals was so outrageous that for a moment, Marcus wondered if he was having some kind of stress-induced hallucination. Who steals a car, gets caught in the act, runs away, and then comes back to try again? What kind of criminal mindset thinks that's a good strategy? But there was no denying what he was hearing. They were back, they were in his driveway, and they were apparently determined to turn this into a war of attrition. Guys! Marcus shouted to his roommates, his voice carrying a new edge of disbelief and fury. They're back. What happened next? Was like something out of a comedy movie, except it was real life and the stakes were Marcus's actual vehicle and sense of security. All four roommates came charging outside in various states of undress, Marcus still in his boxers, David in pajama pants and no shirt, Miguel in a ratty t-shirt and boxers, Kyle in shorts and a tank top, but this time, they came prepared for war. David had grabbed a baseball bat from somewhere. Marcus wasn't even sure they owned a baseball bat, but apparently David had been holding onto one for exactly this type of emergency. Kyle had picked up his skateboard. Not for transportation but as a potential weapon. The board was solid wood and metal, capable of delivering serious damage if the situation escalated to that level. They weren't planning to get physical, none of them were violent people, and they understood the legal and ethical implications of vigilante justice. But they were making it absolutely crystal clear that these thieves had picked the wrong house to mess with twice in one night. Picture this scene for a moment. Four young men in their underwear and pajamas, standing on a front porch at 3 in the morning, one holding a baseball bat, one wielding a skateboard as a weapon, all staring down car thieves with the intensity of soldiers defending their homeland. It was ridiculous. It was absurd. It was also absolutely beautiful in its righteous fury. The thieves weren't in Marcus's car this time. Apparently, they'd learned enough from their first failed attempt to realize that the vehicle had some kind of security measure they couldn't overcome. Instead, they'd moved to another Honda Civic parked just a few feet away from Marcus's car. Because nothing says criminal mastermind like shopping for getaway vehicles in the same driveway where you just got caught stealing. This development added a whole new layer of outrage to the situation. These weren't just thieves. They were thieves who had turned Marcus's neighborhood into their personal automotive buffet. They were treating the area like they owned it, like the cars belonged to them and the residents were just temporary obstacles to be managed or avoided. The four roommates started shouting at them from the porch. It wasn't coordinated or planned. It was just a pure, spontaneous expression of outrage and disbelief. They demanded to know what the hell these people thought they were doing. They made it clear that the police had been called. They expressed their amazement at the criminals' stupidity and persistence. But then one of the thieves did something that would prove to be a massive tactical error, one that would give Marcus the opening he needed to turn this entire situation into a masterclass of psychological warfare. The thief shouted back from the driver's seat of the Honda, "No, this is my car. We're just trying to get away, it's my car." Let's pause here and analyze the psychology of what this criminal just attempted. He was trying to use authority and ownership as a defense mechanism. This isn't theft, officer, this is my property. It's actually a common tactic among criminals. Act like you belong, act like you have every right to be there, project confidence and legitimacy, and maybe people will back down or at least hesitate long enough for you to escape. In some situations, this tactic might actually work. Bystanders who aren't sure what they're witnessing might hesitate to intervene if someone confidently claims ownership. Police officers arriving on scene might need to sort through competing claims before taking action. It's a psychological manipulation designed to create doubt and confusion. But this thief had just tried to use this tactic on Marcus, a man who'd been awakened by the sound of someone stealing his car, who'd already caught these same criminals in the act once before, who was standing on his own property with 3 witnesses, and who was still running on pure adrenaline and righteous fury. In other words, the thief had just brought psychological manipulation to a logical fight. Marcus looked at this thief attempting to claim ownership of what was obviously a stolen vehicle. Then he looked at his 3 roommates standing behind him, David with his baseball bat, Miguel radiating protective energy, Kyle holding his skateboard and looking ready for whatever came next. Then he looked back at the thief, and somewhere in his adrenaline-fueled brain, the most perfect response formulated itself. It was one of those moments where time seems to slow down, where all the chaos and confusion crystallizes into perfect clarity, where the exact right words appear in your mind like they've been waiting their whole existence for this precise moment to be spoken. Marcus took a deep breath, channeled every ounce of authority and conviction he possessed, and shouted back with the confidence of someone who just discovered the cheat code to life, "No, that's my CR now. That's mine." The brilliance of this response cannot be overstated. The thief had tried to claim ownership of a stolen car to justify his presence and actions. Marcus had simply applied the exact same logic to claim ownership of the thief's stolen car. If we're playing the possession is 9/10 of the loss game, then Marcus just declared himself the winner. But it wasn't just the logic that made this moment perfect. It was the context. Marcus was standing on his own property, backed up by 3 witnesses, confronting criminals who'd been caught red-handed in the act of theft. He had moral authority, legal authority, and numerical superiority. When he claimed ownership of their car, he wasn't just making a joke, he was making a statement about justice, about consequences, and about what happens when criminals mess with the wrong people. The thief had tried to use confidence and false authority as weapons. Marcus had just demonstrated what real confidence and real authority actually looked like. The response from the thieves was everything Marcus could have hoped for and more. Okay man. That's it. That was their entire counter-argument to Marcus's claim of ownership. Not, "No, you're wrong." Not, "That's ridiculous." Not, "We're calling your bluff." Just a confused, deflated acknowledgement that they'd been outmaneuvered by someone who was better at their own game than they were. And then they just ran away. Let me repeat that for emphasis. 2 car thieves, caught in the act of stealing someone's vehicle, were defeated by a man in his underwear using their own flawed logic against them. They didn't argue. They didn't fight. They didn't even attempt to maintain their obviously false claim of ownership. They simply accepted defeat and fled into the night like the cowards they were. Marcus couldn't believe it had worked. His roommates couldn't believe it had worked. Honestly, if we didn't have Marcus's own testimony, most people wouldn't believe it could work. But it did work, and there are several psychological and practical reasons why this moment of genius achieved such perfect results. First, the thieves were already operating from a position of complete illegitimacy. They knew they were lying when they claimed the car was theirs. They knew they were criminals doing criminal things. When Marcus matched their energy with an even more confident claim, backed up by superior moral and legal authority, their entire psychological foundation crumbled. Second, Marcus had allies. This wasn't one confused homeowner against 2 determined criminals. This was 4 united residents against 2 isolated thieves. The optics were terrible for the criminals and perfect for Marcus. Third, and perhaps most importantly, Marcus's response was so unexpected and so perfectly delivered that it completely disrupted the thieves' decision-making process. They prepared for various contingencies, running away, fighting, arguing, maybe even negotiating, but they hadn't prepared for someone to claim ownership of their getaway car with such authority and conviction that they'd find themselves agreeing with it. Marcus immediately called the police, because that's what responsible citizens do when they've just outsmarted criminals through sheer audacity and superior logic. He and his roommates stayed outside to keep watch, making sure the thieves didn't decide to attempt round 3 of their incompetent crime spree. When the police arrived, they had to check out the Honda that the thieves had been attempting to steal. Because of course, Marcus's claim that it was his car now was just psychological warfare, it wasn't legally binding. But the investigation revealed exactly what everyone expected: the car was stolen. Some other poor victim was about to get their vehicle back, thanks to Marcus's intervention. The police were impressed by the whole story. They'd seen a lot of creative crime-fighting techniques over the years, but claiming ownership of the criminal's stolen getaway car was a new one, even for veteran officers in a high-crime city. They commended Marcus for not getting physical while still standing up for himself and his community. But beyond the immediate satisfaction of the moment, there were deeper implications to what had just happened. Marcus had discovered something powerful about the psychology of confrontation and the dynamics of authority. He'd learned that confidence, when backed by legitimacy and moral authority, could be more effective than violence or aggression. The thieves had tried to use false confidence as a weapon, but they discovered that real confidence, the kind that comes from being right, from standing on solid ground, from having community support, was infinitely more powerful than any criminal bluff. In the days that followed, Marcus's story spread through his neighborhood like wildfire. Other residents who'd been victims of car theft found inspiration in his approach. His roommates retold the story with the pride of people who'd been part of something larger than themselves. Even the local police started sharing the story as an example of smart, safe community response to crime. But the real impact was on Marcus himself. For months, he'd felt powerless against the crime in his neighborhood. He'd installed security measures, developed cautious routines, and tried to minimize his risk, but he'd still felt like prey in his own community. The night of the attempted theft changed that completely. Marcus realized that criminals count on people feeling powerless, on victims being too shocked or scared to respond effectively, on communities being too fragmented to support each other. The thieves who targeted his car had made all those assumptions, and every single assumption had proven catastrophically wrong. His roommates had rallied to his defense without hesitation. His quick thinking had turned a criminal's own tactics against them. His willingness to stand up for himself had protected not just his own property but someone else's stolen vehicle as well. He transformed from potential victim to neighborhood hero in the span of a single conversation. Let's take a moment to appreciate the true hero of this story, that $50 kill switch that Marcus had installed in his Honda Civic. On the surface, it seems like a simple security device, just a hidden button that cuts power to the ignition. But in the broader context of this story, it represented something much more significant. The kill switch was Marcus's refusal to accept victimization as inevitable. In a neighborhood where car theft was common, where many residents had simply accepted that losing their vehicle was a matter of when rather than if, Marcus had taken proactive steps to protect himself. He'd invested in his own security rather than just hoping for the best. More importantly, the kill switch had bought him time. Without it, the thieves would have successfully stolen his car within minutes of starting their attempt. Marcus would have woken up to an empty driveway and nothing but frustration and police reports. Instead, the kill switch created the opportunity. For everything that followed, the confrontation, the psychological warfare, the community response, the recovery of someone else's stolen vehicle. That $50 investment had prevented thousands of dollars in losses, insurance claims, and personal disruption. But more than that, it had created the conditions for Marcus to transform from victim to victor, to discover his own power and capability in a situation that could have left him feeling violated and helpless. The thieves in this story provide a fascinating case study in criminal psychology and the various ways that illegal behavior can backfire spectacularly. Their decision-making process reveals several critical flaws in criminal thinking that ultimately led to their defeat. First, they underestimated their target. They saw an older Honda Civic in what they assumed was a vulnerable neighborhood and made the calculation that it would be an easy score. They didn't consider the possibility that the owner might have installed security measures, might be prepared for exactly this scenario, or might be willing and able to fight back effectively. Second, they overestimated their own competence. When the kill switch prevented them from stealing Marcus's car, a smarter criminal enterprise would have cut their losses and moved to a completely different area. Instead, they decided to stay in the same location and attempt to steal a different vehicle. This decision demonstrated a level of arrogance and poor judgment that professional criminals would recognize as dangerously amateur. His roommates, too, had been changed by the experience. They discovered that they were the kind of people who would grab whatever weapons they could find and stand with their friend against criminals in the middle of the night. That knowledge became part of their own self-concept, influencing how they approached other situations requiring courage or solidarity. Even the broader neighborhood had been affected. The story of Marcus's triumph spread among residents, creating a sense that criminal activity could be successfully resisted through community cooperation and individual initiative. Other residents began taking their own security measures more seriously, and there was a noticeable increase in neighbors looking out for each other's property and safety. The moment when those thieves accepted Marcus's claim and walked away represents one of the purest examples of psychological victory you'll ever hear. These criminals had come to steal from him, had violated his space and his sense of security, and had demonstrated complete disrespect for his rights and property. And in the end, they were defeated not by violence or police intervention, but by their own victim being smarter, more confident, and better prepared than they were. Marcus had turned their own criminal logic against them so effectively that they couldn't even maintain their obviously false position. They'd been out-argued, outmaneuvered, and out-confident by someone they'd assumed would be helpless. The psychological impact of that defeat probably lasted far longer than any physical confrontation would have. The satisfaction of that moment, watching criminals walk away in defeat because you'd beaten them at their own game, is the kind of justice that feels almost too perfect to exist in real life. But it happened, and it happened because one man refused to accept victimization and had the community support to make his refusal effective. Sometimes the most satisfying revenge isn't elaborate or planned, it's just being smart enough, brave enough, and prepared enough to turn someone's own tactics against them when it really matters. Marcus proved that criminals count on us feeling powerless, but community support and quick thinking can flip the script faster than they can process what's happening. If this story gave you chills and made you want to cheer for the good guy, smash that like button and tell us in the comments, what's the most satisfying moment of justice you've ever witnessed? Have you ever seen someone's own tactics backfire on them spectacularly? And of course, subscribe for more incredible stories where the underdog comes out on top. Sometimes, justice really does prevail. His roommates, too, had been changed by the experience. They discovered that they were the kind of people who would grab whatever weapons they could find and stand with their friend against criminals in the middle of the night. That knowledge became part of their own self-concept, influencing how they approached other situations requiring courage or solidarity. Even the broader neighborhood had been affected. The story of Marcus's triumph spread among residents, creating a sense that criminal activity could be successfully resisted through community cooperation and individual initiative. Other residents began taking their own security measures more seriously, and there was a noticeable increase in neighbors looking out for each other's property and safety. The moment when those thieves accepted Marcus's claim and walked away represents one of the purest examples of psychological victory you'll ever hear. These criminals had come to steal from him, had violated his space and his sense of security, and had demonstrated complete disrespect for his rights and property. And in the end, they were defeated not by violence or police intervention, but by their own victim being smarter, more confident, and better prepared than they were. Marcus had turned their own criminal logic against them so effectively that they couldn't even maintain their obviously false position. They'd been out-argued, outmaneuvered, and out-confident by someone they'd assumed would be helpless. The psychological impact of that defeat probably lasted far longer than any physical confrontation would have. The satisfaction of that moment, watching criminals walk away in defeat because you'd beaten them at their own game, is the kind of justice that feels almost too perfect to exist in real life. But it happened, and it happened because one man refused to accept victimization and had the community support to make his refusal effective. Sometimes the most satisfying revenge isn't elaborate or planned, it's just being smart enough, brave enough, and prepared enough to turn someone's own tactics against them when it really matters. Marcus proved that criminals count on us feeling powerless, but community support and quick thinking can flip the script faster than they can process what's happening. If this story gave you chills and made you want to cheer for the good guy, smash that like button and tell us in the comments, what's the most satisfying moment of justice you've ever witnessed? Have you ever seen someone's own tactics backfire on them spectacularly? And of course, subscribe for more incredible stories where the underdog comes out on top. Sometimes, justice really does prevail.